I'm about as excited for as I've ever been for a playoff series. Kind of similar to that Brooklyn Nets series. It's this concept of the team that is achieving something that I haven't seen a team achieve in a very long time versus, in last round, KD, a player I thought was the best player in the world at the time, although no longer, and a guy in Giannis who is absolutely, unequivocally the best player left in this playoff run. So it's kind of like the age-old concept of the best player on the floor versus the best team and which is going to win. We've had a lot of conversations over the course of this season, pretty much ever since that Suns playoff series with the Lakers last year on our show, where I've been very, very interested to see, with the direction the league is going, how valuable having the best player on the floor is now compared to the way it was 10 years ago, with the way teams can double and recover, and how important it is to have guys off the ball that can make plays off the dribble. And Milwaukee in particular is kind of set up in a very traditional sense. They defend in a traditional sense. On the offensive end, they have a lot of guys that are spot-up guys, not necessarily like closeout attacker, higher-end offensive talent type of guys like Boston has. So it's a super, super interesting dynamic going against Boston, which is, as I have said on this show so many times, I think is a very, very modern, almost ahead of its time type of team construct. So just an unbelievably interesting matchup. So the regular season series between these two teams is completely worthless. They played 3 of their games back in 2021. And then the fourth matchup between these two teams took place right before the end of the season in a game where both teams sat out a bunch of important players. So not a whole lot you could take from the season series. However, in 56 minutes this year, when both Tatum and Giannis were on the floor, meaning Boston and Milwaukee with their best players playing, Boston was plus 17. But again, can't take too much from that. A lot of those minutes, all of those minutes actually took place literally in a different calendar year. So it's hard to take too much away from that. I want to start with Milwaukee on offense. So guarding Giannis, we've talked a lot about this on the show. I won't go too deep into it today, but the gist of it is I expect Giannis to have a great deal of success in his supplementary offense. Offensive rebounding, particularly on his own misses, but just him bulldozing around the rim and being just bigger and stronger than everybody and grabbing offensive rebounds and putbacks. The reason why is, specifically when it comes to offensive rebounding, it's not so much about manpower as it is about one single person being unbox outable. You know what I mean? So like there could be 3 Celtics around the rim with Giannis and he's just too big and strong and athletic and he'll get them all. You know what I mean? So I think he'll have a lot of supplementary offense that'll lead to better counting stats. I think Giannis's statistical series will appear much better than Kevin Durant's statistical series. However, I expect Boston to give Giannis problems in a lot of the same ways that Kevin Durant had problems, getting to his spots and catching the ball. Boston did a really good job with KD of disrupting KD on post entries. They had a ton of turnovers on post entries because they would have basically Tatum gamble to one side on the post entry and they'd send help on the other side. And even when he did catch, KD would quick turn and there'd be people diving at the ball. So they made it complicated to get KD the basketball. And then they did a really good job of testing KD's handle, very aggressive with length, being like lots of reaching and testing KD's ability to handle the basketball. And KD and Giannis are good ball handlers, but they're tall, and that causes issues when you have guys reaching in because there's just so much more distance that the ball has to travel. So specifically with Giannis, I expect him to have a lot of similar issues to KD, turning the basketball over, struggling with handling a ton of traffic, passing out of double teams and things like that. I expect Giannis to struggle there. But with his supplementary offense, with his offensive rebound and transition, there will be a half dozen possessions every game where just because of the way that a Celtic misses a shot, Giannis will have a head of steam and no one will be able to stop him, and he'll get layups and dunks and free throws and stuff out of that. So Giannis will have a statistically successful series, but I expect him to struggle overall. The other thing that's interesting with Milwaukee on offense is this news with Chris Middleton. So Shams Charania reported, I believe 2 days ago, that Chris Middleton will be out for the entire series and potentially even the Eastern Conference Finals should the Bucks make it to that point. This is why that's important. Boston is a pure switch everything team, especially with Rob Williams in the lineup. They really only run drop when Daniel Tice is out there because they don't want to get Daniel Tice into switches, right? So it's going to be a switch everything team, and that inherently turns you into a matchup attacking team. So we know Giannis can attack matchups, but we just discussed all the ways that Boston's going to try to disrupt that. So that leaves it to Drew Holiday as your other guy who can attack matchups. The trouble there is this is where the lack of Chris Middleton is an issue, because Chris Middleton last year was an excellent option for Milwaukee to go to attack matchups, especially as a 3-level scorer who's 6'8" and can, hit back to the basket shots out of the post and hit off the dribble shots from the perimeter and can get to the rim and all of those things, right? So having Chris Middleton out there is a significant loss when you're attacking a switching defense. Not that it might not have mattered anyway. You guys know how high I am on Boston. I probably would have picked Boston to win this series regardless, but with Chris Middleton out, it makes it significantly tougher. Milwaukee on defense, I wanted to just kind of give you guys a couple of really, really basic stats to demonstrate just how dominant this Boston team has been. We talked about this in a pod last week, but I don't know if it's the anti-Celtics bias that, kind of similar to the anti-Lakers bias, which is just natural in the NBA fan base. They're the two most successful fan bases, and they're the two loudest fan bases, which kind of inherently makes them unlikable to everybody. But the thing is that has poisoned people's minds into thinking that the sweep of the Brooklyn Nets was about Brooklyn being terrible more so than Boston being great. When the reality is since January 23rd, when all of this took off for Boston, Boston is 32-7 since January 23rd. They have the best offense in the league, the best defense in the league. They're 5 points per 100 possessions better than everybody on defense. They're 7.5 points better overall per 100 possessions than everybody in the league. So they've been unbelievably dominant. So it's poisoning people's minds and making them think that, the first round series was a fluke based on matchups and KD and Kyrie, pissing down their leg, when that's not what happened. They ran into the best team in the NBA. So why do I bring that up right now? Because we're talking about Boston on offense against Milwaukee. And I bet you if you asked the vast majority of casual fans, they would think of Boston as not a very good offense. But again, and this is the important detail, we are in a 39-game stretch here where they've been the best offense in all of basketball. Just in this postseason run, Boston has the best half-court offense and the best transition offense, according to Cleaning the Glass. This is an unbelievably good offensive team. And specifically with Milwaukee, we've talked about how Milwaukee struggles because their defense is set up to take away the paint. So they attack specific matchups. Teams like Chicago that kind of live inside the three-point line, they're going to have a lot of success. But against teams that generate quality three-point shots and can knock them down, they struggle. Again, this is important to understand. Milwaukee's defense this season was average on a points per 100 possessions allowed basis, despite the fact that they were dominant in shutting off the paint and dominant on the defensive glass. It was strictly because their defense would overhelp and give up a ton of threes on the back end. They were not good at rotating around to shooters. One last stat I'm going to give you on this to kind of seal the deal here. Since January 23rd, this stretch with Boston is 5th in three-point volume, so in total three-point attempts per game compared to the rest of the league, in 3rd in three-point percentage. So this is the opposite of the Chicago situation. This is a team that is great at generating wide-open threes and great at knocking them down. So even if we throw away everything that I've loved about this Boston team on the defensive end, which is where I derive my confidence in this matchup, it's the other end of the floor where Boston has an advantage as well against a very specific Milwaukee weakness. And so in this case, I'm picking Boston in 5. I think Milwaukee will get one game on their home floor, game 3 or game 4, we'll see. But I expect this to be a dominant Boston Celtics victory. I expect Giannis to struggle despite having better counting stats than KD. And you just need to keep it simple, guys. Since January 23rd, Boston is the best team in the league. Best on offense, best on defense. They demonstrated in the first round against Brooklyn that they're one of the best defensive teams that we have ever seen. Milwaukee is missing their second most important player and arguably one of their most important matchup attackers in Chris Middleton. So just simply on the surface, we know that Boston is a better basketball team at a health advantage in this series. To be clear, this is how much I think Boston is a favorite. If Milwaukee were to win this series, it would be an accomplishment for Giannis on par with like 2007 LeBron knocking out the Pistons. It would be one of the greatest accomplishments not associated with an NBA title in NBA history. That's how confident I am in Boston. That's the challenge that's in front of Giannis. If he can pull it off, I will have nothing but props for the guy. But that's the type of situation that he's facing here. This is an all-time great defense in a Boston Celtics team that has been clearly better than everybody else, and Giannis is without his co-star. It's going to be tough. He's capable of it. Definitely give Milwaukee a chance, but I'm picking Boston in 5.